What did this business do to get into Brian Pallister's bad books? Well, first off, they didn't evict their patrons before 11 p.m. as Brian Pallister has demanded that they do, but they also committed the cardinal sin of allowing their patrons to dance. Keean Bexte for Rebel News in Winnipeg, Manitoba. This is the capital city of the most oppressive province in the entire country right now. Even more oppressive than Doug the Thug's province of Ontario, which actually has mounted police units running through crowds of protesters, if you can believe it. I'm here in Manitoba to show you exactly what is going on in this province lately under the regime of the tyrant Brian Pallister. I was here just a week ago shopping in a Walmart to show you how he has all but canceled Christmas, but something else happened. Brian Pallister used the powers of the executive branch to put out a government press release calling out about a dozen businesses who he says broke the law. Now you might think, oh, that doesn't make much sense. Usually it is the police or bylaw officers that issue tickets, and then it is a judge that says you're guilty or you're not guilty. Here in Winnipeg, Brian Pallister took that power, the power of the judiciary, for himself. He took that power for the executive branch of government. That's something that no democracy should ever hope to see, but Brian Pallister is actually bragging about it on government releases. Watch this.
If you break the public health rules, there's a good chance you might get your name mentioned on TV.
Do you think he goes home and thinks that he's cool for acting like that on television? Do you think that his family's proud of him for oppressing his people? Do you think his neighbors are happy with him? Well, clearly not. Actually, if you look at his approval ratings, it's the lowest in the country, in the 30s actually. People in Manitoba despise the tyrant Brian Pallister, and it makes sense. When you go on the CBC and brag about having the most oppressive regime in the entire country, well, people aren't going to like you.
We're on this, and we've been on it for some weeks. The reality, though, is that we have to reduce the number of contacts, and that's why these very stringent restrictions, the most stringent in Canada, have been invoked for a long time.
You keep saying that your province has the most stringent restriction.
Before any court was able to say you're guilty or not guilty, Brian Pallister took it upon himself to call out businesses that we are going to visit today. We're going to go around Winnipeg and speak to the business owners, or at least visit their businesses if they haven't closed down already, to see how it feels to have Brian Pallister's boot on their neck. This is the first location that Brian Pallister used government resources to name and shame. Using his executive branch, he released that press release that you're seeing right now, saying that Bar Italia, well, they had 7 people on their patio and 5 of them were in possession of alcohol. Obviously, that means they're going to all die of COVID within the next few hours. So at least that's, I'm sure, what Brian Pallister would like you to believe, because he thrives off of your fear. He gave Bar Italia a $5,000 fine, and now, what do you know? They're closed. Are they closed because of Brian Pallister's thuggish overreach? Well, I don't know. You have to make that decision for yourself. They're not answering their phones. I tried to interview them to ask them how much damage a $5,000 bill causes to their bottom line, whether or not they have to lay off some employees. That's the salary of like 2 waitresses. In fact, every single business that I tried to get in contact with, every business that Brian Pallister named and shamed, well, they didn't answer their phones, or in some cases it was disconnected. We're going to go to each and every other outlet in Winnipeg that Brian Pallister thuggishly called out using government resources to see if they are open or if they're closed, what's going on, and how much damage this has done to their business. Now, this is the Pembina Hotel. This is the second business that Brian Pallister used his government resources to call out. They were given a $5,000 fine for not having the audacity to kick paying customers out before 11 p.m. Because you know as well as I do that COVID only spreads when it's dark out, or at least that's what Brian Pallister would have us to believe. Now, this isn't a 5-star hotel by any means, and you can understand what a $5,000 fine could do to a place like this. I'm sure they could use that $5,000 to, I don't know, fix these windows or repaint the signs. But Brian Pallister, he wanted that money in the government coffers to punish this business. Now, I spoke with an employee of this business, I'm pretty sure the audio didn't pick it up, and he said that the fines were appealed and then thrown out. That seems to be what I would expect, actually. Now, I spoke to a few legal experts about what's going on here in Manitoba, and they said, well, when a government authority like the Premier taints legal proceedings, saying, yes, you're definitely guilty, no plaintiff could reasonably expect to get a fair trial after that, and it would get thrown out. That's the result of Brian Pallister's incompetence, him jumping the gun to say all of these businesses are guilty of violating his draconian measures. Now, we're going to go to the next business and see what's going on there. Now this brings us to the Pony Corral. What did this business do to get into Brian Pallister's bad books? Well, first off, they didn't evict their patrons before 11 p.m., as Brian Pallister has demanded that they do, but they also committed the cardinal sin of allowing their patrons to dance on the dance floor at this business. Brian Pallister doesn't want any of that. No having fun here in Manitoba, no Christmas, no dancing, no singing, no church. That's Brian Pallister's Manitoba for you. This business was fined $5,000 for that. And Brian Pallister, well, I can't even say it's his fault, because at the start of the pandemic planning response for Manitoba, once the virus came from Wuhan, China, all the way to Canada and started spreading, community spread started here in Manitoba. Well, Brian Pallister, he was at his luxury property in Costa Rica, if you can believe it. He doesn't really care about the people of Manitoba. He doesn't really understand what a $5,000 fine means to a business like this, what it means to all of the businesses that we visited today. My guess is here in Winnipeg and the rest of Manitoba, where these fines have been issued, where the executive branch of government has called out these businesses and labeled them as guilty before any sort of due process could be done, my guess is they're all going to be thrown out. That's what happened to at least one business here today. That's what we learned at the Pembina Hotel. They say that their $5,000 fine was actually thrown out. My guess is that will happen to every other business. This is all Brian Pallister's fault. First, the fact that the fines were issued in the first place, and second, that they're going to have to be thrown out. It was a large waste of time, and the only damage done really was to the reputations of these businesses that really shouldn't have been persecuted by their government in the first place. For Rebel News in Winnipeg, Manitoba, I'm Keean Bexte. Thanks so much for tuning into our coverage here at Rebel News. Be sure to leave a comment and let me know what you think about these draconian fines that Brian Pallister's government is issuing to businesses here in Manitoba, and what you think about him naming and shaming them.